When you think of the best comic book villains without superpowers, your mind often goes to DC and the likes of the Joker, Lex Luthor, Deathstroke, Harley Quinn, and the Riddler, just to name a few. But Marvel also has a number of great villains who don't have any superpowers, and are actually just as dangerous and formidable as some of the strongest baddies in the Marvel catalog. In this video, we're going to take a look at the 10 best and strongest MCU villains who don't actually have any powers. Let's go!
You don't want any part of this.
Alright, we have to start with the villain who is so great that he won not just once, but twice. We are, of course, talking about Helmut, or Baron, Zemo. Although ending up in a jail cell twice, it was a price Zemo was willing to pay to complete his endgame. Zemo first showed up in Civil War, where he set about defeating the Avengers by destroying them from within, and managing to turn former besties, Tony and Steve, against one another after revealing that it was, in fact, Bucky who murdered Tony's parents. Although Zemo was captured by Black Panther, he managed to do what Loki and Ultron failed to do: defeat the Avengers. What's even more impressive is that he managed to win again after blowing up the Super Soldier Flag Smashers at the end of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, all while being in a jail cell and having no superpowers. Unless, of course, you count his sweet, sweet dance moves as a superpower. While the Mad Titan Thanos managed to beat the Avengers in Infinity War, that guy actually has powers, as well as a gauntlet filled with magical stones, so it makes Zemo's feat even more impressive. Zemo, of course, wasn't the only villain without superpowers to feature in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, with UFC legend Georges St. Pierre's Batroc the Leaper also making an appearance. While Batroc has extraordinary agility, reflexes, and hand-to-hand combat skills, they are not exactly what you would call super. While Batroc may not have experienced the limelight like other villains on this list, Batroc is a force to be reckoned with and perhaps doesn't get the credit he deserves. Not only was he more than a handful for a super serum-filled Steve Rogers, but he was also extremely difficult for Sam Wilson's newly crowned Captain America, providing them both a real contest. Next on the list is another villain who not only gave the hero they were battling a run for their money, but also kind of won as well. And that is Mysterio. Now, seeing as Mysterio seemingly died, that doesn't constitute much of a win, but the Master Illusionist did reveal Spider-Man's most prized possession to the entire world at the end of Far From Home.
Spider-Man's name is Peter Parker.
His secret identity, potentially turning Peter into a wanted fugitive. Although it did at first appear that Mysterio had super abilities, it all just turned out to be an illusion. But his inventions, trickery, and manipulation skills proved to be a real threat not just to Spider-Man, but to the entire Avengers as he managed to worm his way into a position of respect and authority. As we said though, Mysterio seemingly didn't make it out of the movie alive, but we wouldn't be at all surprised if his death was also just an illusion and he's just waiting around to join the Sinister Six in the very near future. But Mysterio wasn't the only Spider-Man villain to give the web-slinger a real run for his money, as Adrian Toomes' Vulture in Spider-Man Homecoming also gave Peter somewhat of a headache. Toomes and his gang were able to use their engineering skills to reverse engineer alien technology and create a number of dangerous weapons. While it's hard to imagine Toomes giving Tony Stark or Sam Wilson much of a problem in their prime, Toomes' skills were more than enough to create issues for a young hero like Peter. And Michael Keaton's acting ability also gave the character a real level of menace. Speaking of Tony though, he found himself going up against a number of villains who also didn't have any superpowers. Out of all the villains he faced, Jeff Bridges' Obadiah Stane was probably one of the least effective as, like a parasite, he lived off the Stark family's success. But by working in the shadows, he managed to fund terrorist organizations and, of course, replicate Tony's earliest Iron Man suit. However, that was still not enough for him to beat Tony, and out of all the Iron Man villains, he arguably posed the least amount of threat. Safe to say he wouldn't be able to cut it in a cave with a box of scraps. One villain that did pose more of a threat was Sam Rockwell's Justin Hammer. Hammer may have overall been overshadowed in the movie, but let's face it, he was a constant menace to Tony and managed to replicate the success of Obadiah Stane and then some by creating a number of armored drones. Hammer also managed to break Whiplash out of prison and fake his death while also serving as a real threat to Tony on a business level as well. As a whole though, it feels like Rockwell's skills were underutilized in the movie. But with him still alive in the MCU, hopefully we'll see him once again in the future. Since we did just bring up Whiplash, it would be hard not to do this list without mentioning him. Now, you'd think being a topless dude with electric whips wouldn't make for much of a villain, but being so unhinged and downright tenacious, Whiplash managed to give Tony a little bit of a scare, waltzing in and nearly killing Tony early on in Iron Man 2. Tony manages to defeat him, but at the cost of a very damaged suit, and Whiplash manages to prove his point that Tony is far from invincible. Whiplash again causes more trouble by controlling Hammer's drones, and although he was defeated, he did manage to prove his point by placing a bullseye on Tony's back. One of the Iron Man villains who took aim at that bullseye was Iron Man 3 villain Aldrich Killian. Killian's villainy was created from a hatred of Tony Stark, and the goal of matching Tony for intelligence. Killian, using the veil of Trevor Slattery's fake Mandarin, managed to take Tony to the brink, nearly killing him and destroying his home. But most notably, Killian set about targeting Tony's greatest weakness, Pepper Potts. Killian also surpassed the likes of Stain in terms of technological invention and could have caused some real issues to other members of the Avengers if he hadn't been defeated early on. When it comes to Ant-Man's villain, Darren Cross's Yellowjacket isn't exactly anything unique, and for all intents and purposes is basically just another Stain or Hammer, except now and then he turns people into mush for some reason. But Cross did manage to build just as an effective and high-tech version of Hank Pym's creation, and his almost sociopathic attitude made him a formidable counterpart for Scott Lang to battle. In fact, in terms of their fight, it was pretty even, the only difference being that Cross was willing to play dirty, which is always dangerous. As we've seen many times, the most dangerous threat to the Avengers is the one that comes from within and eats them up from the inside, just like Hydra did when they infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. and looked to destroy them by burning the house down from within. That makes Hydra operatives like Alexander Pierce a real threat, as they can cause absolute chaos, and the damage he created was enough to bring S.H.I.E.L.D. to its knees. While Pierce is now gone, with suspicious characters like Valentina popping up, the threat of Hydra or some similar nefarious organization still looms large.
That was... wow.
Before we wrap this one up, we wanted to include some honorable mentions who, for some reason or another, didn't quite make the list. They include Thunderbolt Ross, who is not currently an out-and-out villain but has caused multiple problems, Eric Killmonger, who of course did gain powers in Black Panther but didn't start with them and is seen as one of the best MCU villains so far, Crossbones, who like Batroc was a force to be reckoned with, Doc Ock, who isn't an MCU villain yet but is reportedly appearing in No Way Home,
I certainly know the consequences of the slightest miscalculation,
Ulysses Klaue, who is really on this list because, let's face it, Andy Serkis played him so darn well,
I made it rain!
Yelena Belova, who will be appearing in Black Widow, although the jury is still out on whether or not she's a villain, and Taskmaster, who will also appear in Black Widow. Now I know he has photographic reflexes, but I'm not sure whether that counts as super or not, so hey, he's making the list, and we'll let you guys decide whether he should be here or not. In terms of other Marvel villains without superpowers that we would love to see show up, we have a few names that come to mind. First on the list is Spider-Man villain Kraven the Hunter. Now, I don't know about you, but I would personally love to see an adaptation of Kraven's Last Hunt on the big screen. Keanu Reeves has been linked to play the part for some time now, but so far nothing has come to fruition. Wolverine villain William Stryker feels like he will inevitably be a part of the MCU very soon, given his links to Logan. And I know he's already appeared in the Daredevil series and of course in the Ben Affleck movie, but having Bullseye in the MCU would be extremely welcome. And although it would be great for Wilson Bethel to reprise the character, I wouldn't say no to Jason Statham playing the part. Also, I know he's not technically a part of the MCU proper as of yet, but I will take any opportunity I can to talk about Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin, because let's face it, Kingpin is one of the greatest Marvel villains full stop, let alone being one that has no powers. Not only is he really strong without super serum, but he's also extremely intelligent and used to getting what he wants, and is a constant threat to the likes of Spider-Man and Daredevil in the comics. Plus, Vincent D'Onofrio. Enough said. And finally, even though I know he falls more into the anti-hero segment, the Punisher is also one of the greatest characters in Marvel's library who just happens to not have any powers. Surely we get to see Jon Bernthal play the character in the MCU proper, right? But hey, which villain with no powers would you like to see in the MCU? Would you be up for some more Hammer time? I know I personally would be, and I hold out hope as ever that one day we will see the likes of Kingpin, Bullseye, and Punisher making an appearance in the MCU proper. One day.